Welcome back to Show and Tell. I'm Billie. I know it's been minutes since I last saw you. There's been a lot going on in my life, but what else can I tell you? But of course, we're here to talk about knitting, not all that life stuff. I'll save some of that till the end. So, no, there are no finished objects, no FOs. Working on almost completing something. I've been doing a knit along with a small group of other knitters for the sailor sweater that you might have seen if you watched my episode with Julie Fulving. It's a 1930s pattern, and I don't know how much of it I have shown you, but let me take you through it a little bit. I started by knitting the little sleeve instead of doing a swatch, and I did a twisted rib because my ribbing generally looks like that. It's a little wonky, so twisted rib makes it look just a wee bit neater. The texture is really interesting. I'm working with Sandnesgarn tin linen, 14% linen, 53% cotton, and 33% viscose. And the pattern, it's a very interesting little texture, very simple to knit. I wish you had joined along with us in the knit along. We've been having a lot of fun. So after I did the sleeve, then I started on the back, and it goes very quickly. I'm on a size 5 needle, and my gauge is about 6.5, 6 3/4 stitches to the inch. So here's the back. I did a provisional cast on here, which looked like this. I had a cable from my ChiaoGoo needles that I cast on around. So this is the front. I will come back, put my size 2 needles on here, and I'll be knitting downwards from here to do the ribbing on the front. But I've already completed the ribbing on the back, the whole back, and I've knit the entire front except for that ribbing. I did a 3 needle bind off. I kept the stitches from the front and the back live so I could do a 3 needle bind off at the shoulder. And I think it looks pretty nice. I will say that because the pattern is vintage and it's only written in one size, the shoulders were way too wide for me, even though it was, I think, a 35-inch bust. So I had to rip it out a couple of times until I got the width here that I liked. And also I had to redo the upper portion of the back from above the armholes, like from about here on up. The good news is this is a pattern that works up pretty quickly, but I wanted to get this to be closer into where my actual shoulder is because I had tried it before and basted the sleeve in, and it was looking like kind of like a drop shoulder on me, and that's not the look of the sweater. So it took me a while. It was a little bit annoying to have to re-knit, but in the end, it's always worth it to get a product that you like and that you'd be proud to wear. So that's the front and the back. This is some of my progress on my 1930s sailor collar sweater. Before I rip part of it out, I wanted to show you the issue that I'm having. I'll insert a photograph here where I basted this arm side to the back of the sweater and to the sleeve and tried it on just as a trial run to see if I was on track, because I've modified the pattern significantly. And you'll see in the picture that it's not hitting me on the right part of my shoulder. So I took some measurements and started to re-knit the other shoulder. You can see that this is much narrower than this all the way up. If you're not able to see that, let me show you like this. So I have the neckline all lined up. This is a good inch narrower. And I think that's about exactly what I'll need. So I wanted to show you this before I go about ripping this section out and redoing it. Now, if you'll remember, the sleeve only took me about a day to knit, and this little section here is less than a day. And in fact, over here, it's even narrower. So I know that pulling this back, even to the underarm, is not gonna set me back that much. But I wanted to get this on film for you before I pull that back. And then there's a big sailor collar. So you start at the back and work up and over the shoulder and down the front. And unlike the other people in the group, I decided to incorporate sequins in here. And I put together a little video showing how I do the sequins, which I'll insert here. Let me start by showing you the receipt that I found from 1983. 20 strands of sequins, I guess they're 200 on each strand, was $40 back then, plus tax. And I love how they calculated the tax, 8.25%. They did 8%, that was $3.20. And then a quarter of 40 was going to be another 10 cents. So they had $3.30 tax to get to $43.30. This is how they are sold. All of these strands hooked together, very important, by this little metal clamp. So these are not falling out. But I released the clamp just enough to separate out one of the strands. And I didn't want to load the sequins on before showing you how this works. So there's a slip knot here, and I'm just pulling to release that slip knot. And now you'll see these two ends are loose, but this end is in a loop. Very important, because the way you're going to string the sequins onto your yarn is by putting the yarn through that loop, like so, and doubling it back. And then sliding the sequins onto the yarn. I'm going to slide a bunch of them because I am planning to do quite a bit with these sequins. I might even need the whole strand, but I don't want to have too many on here in case I decide not to use them if I don't like how it looks. I'd never get them back onto there. Well, I shouldn't say never, it wouldn't be easy. Okay, so now I pull it past where I had the yarn doubled, and I can release it from that loop. And now I'm ready to knit with sequins loaded onto my yarn. I'm casting on so I can swatch. I'm just going to do a very small number of stitches. Let me knit a base row before I go into the main sequin area. I would be doing the stitches on the right side of my work. So let me just move a few stitches down into place. Okay, the trick to knitting with sequins is you do not place a sequin in every stitch. You're going to alternate. And because these things are clearly so precious, you don't want to have two going through. So I knit the stitch like I normally would, and I push the sequin through at the same time. I don't do this every day, so the motion isn't smooth yet, but it will get better as I go along, I hope. And then the next stitch should lock that into place. So now I have 2 stitches with sequins. Third stitch, empty stitch. That stitch gets a sequin. No sequin. Next stitch gets a sequin. No sequin. And I think the end stitch I'm not going to do a sequin on either. Now I simply purl back, no sequins involved. Kind of want to be careful not to have the sequins come through to the back, but you can always adjust later. I think it's even better if you're on a smaller needle, because then that loop that they go through is a smaller loop, keeps them in place. Okay. Now I want to stagger the sequins so that they're not directly above the previous row sequins. So the first stitch I just knit plain. And I'll knit the second stitch plain also. That's the stitch that had the sequin in the prior row. I'm not sure what happened to that one. So in this stitch, I will add a sequin. Knit plain. I want the sequin to come through when I do the yarn through. Okay. Knit plain. Okay, I can see that there was no sequin here, so that means this stitch should have the sequin. No sequin. Yes, this is better. I think I'm starting to feel the rhythm coming back. There is no doubt muscle memory from when I did this 40 years ago. And I think this operation will become smoother as I do it more, like anything. Okay, let me show you how that looks. So it does take a little bit of arranging them. Of course, if they're not all smooth, it just won't look like fish scale, but if you have them all oriented in the same direction, not like that, but all facing up, you will get a very fish scale kind of look. I think that should be very pretty on my sailor sweater. I'll let you be the judge when I finish. So the front, I'm assuming that this is going to hit me about here. So like, you know, below my shoulder somewhat, but not so far down. I thought that would be a nice little nautical stripe kind of a thing. And then these two pieces get tied in a knot, like a sailor knot. My other work in progress is this Ibiza lace scarf. I've been working on this for about 2 years since I went to Scotland. I was working on it on the flight going over. Yeah, it was already underway because I remember I bought these needles at Rhinebeck in 2022, these ergonomic needles, because my ChiaoGoos were too slippery for these delicate little stitches that were just slipping and sliding everywhere. So I know I could go back into my Ravelry and see exactly when, but I think I started just around the time of Rhinebeck, so October 2022, and then later on that year we went to Shetland, and I continued on there, and it's been my carry along project for any time I'm on the subway, anytime I'm in a car, anytime I'm sitting in a doctor's office, because often other things that I'm working on are too complicated or have too many moving parts. This is just this and this, which is running thin. I will attempt to keep knitting until I run out of yarn. It's a 34 row repeat, and I would have to be at the end of the 34th row to graft it to this other part, which is supposed to be, you know, half and half, and they meet in the middle and then they get grafted. So I stopped knitting here at the 34th row so that I'd be able to graft it to the 34th row here. I think I'm on about row 18 of the repeat now. I'm sure I'll be able to complete that set of 34 and maybe even do another set of 34. And I suspect by then I'll be running pretty thin on yarn. I might even be able to do a couple more sets, a few more sets. I don't know. This yarn is so thin that it's deceiving. There's probably still many, many yards on here. Anyway, yeah, I know I could weigh it and figure that out, but I'll just keep going. I haven't shown this to you for a while, and I've been trying to be monogamous on the sailor sweater, but as I said, this is this comes in handy when I know I have to travel. And I have been traveling because every week now I've begun teaching an after school class of little girls, teaching them to knit. So I'm on the subway back and forth, and this is something I can work on both ways. With this, if I get 3 or 4 rows done, it's a big accomplishment because those rows over time, they add up. This is a long-term project. Now, if you're new to this channel, you would not know. What I always say is that I have a limited amount of space. I live in a small Manhattan apartment. So I'm not looking to have a lot of output. I'm really happy to knit on things that take me months, or in this case, years, because I won't be putting out 10 sweaters a year for the next 20 years. I should live that long. But, would be more sweaters than I could fit in my closet. I do have a pretty good sized closet. I have a walk-in closet. My husband has a totally separate closet. We're fortunate that our apartment has really good closet space for a small apartment. Anyway, it's easy to jam up that space. So I'm pretty selective about what I knit, and I do like to knit things that are complicated that will take me a long time. This, for example, this is a pattern I picked up while I was in the Shetland Islands in Unst at a community center with the local women, and the binders of patterns that they've collected over the decades. So I was able to make a photocopy of this. It's old. It's probably from the 1920s. It's called a spencer. It's really like an undergarment. It's wool, so it's really nice and warm. It's a tiny little thing, no sleeves, no collar, nothing, and yet, as I recall, it took me quite a few months. The stitch is really complicated, but that's exactly the way I like it. The more complicated, the better. So on a side note, we all know that knitting is very meditative and calming, soothing. If you're going to have a habit, this is a pretty good one to have. And I must say, I do feel sometimes that I am addicted. But I kind of am in the camp of thinking that it's really good for the brain, for keeping the brain active. Now, if you're just going to do stockinette or garter stitch, row after row, nothing complicated, perhaps not. But I was at the doctor recently for my annual checkup, and I said to him, I'd like you to do the cognitive test, the short one, like the one that Donald Trump said he aced. I'd like to have that done. And he said, why? Are you having a problem? And I said, well, no, not really. Sometimes word recall isn't what I would like it to be. But I just want to have a baseline one. And he was a little reluctant. Then he did administer the test, and I did sail through, and I did get all 30 out of 30. I actually got extra credit on a couple of little things. But at the end, he said to me, well, what are you doing to keep your brain active? So I told him I do online jigsaw puzzles. You can select the number of pieces, and it times you, and you can try and beat your previous speed. So, this little challenge that I give myself. I also do crossword puzzles, and I don't just do like simple crossword puzzles. I'm doing New York Times, LA Times caliber puzzles. They're very challenging. There's also a timer when you do them online, so I can see if I do it in 20 minutes or if it takes me 40 minutes. Of course, if you might not know this if you're not a crossword puzzler, but with the times, Monday is the easiest puzzle, and each day of the week they get progressively harder, leading up to Sunday, and Sunday is much bigger. I can't do the Sunday puzzle completely, but some of the weekday ones I can finish to completion, so that's a little bit of a challenge. And then I said to him, and I knit, and I could see he was laughing at me like, well, what's so good about knitting? What is that doing for your brain? And I said, well, doctor, if you knit the kind of things that I knit, they're complicated. They're sequencing. They involve looking at charts or reading patterns that may be complicated. So there's patterning, there's sequencing, there's a lot of mathematics involved. And then I showed him this, which I had been working on while I was in his waiting room. And I think he then understood. So I'm curious to know if any of you out there feel the same as I do, that it can be very challenging and stimulating for the mind. Reading lace charts, reading Fair charts with lots of colors, come on, it can be complicated. I embrace that. I love a good challenge. It's my personality. And I also have a background in engineering, so I'm not intimidated by things that are mathematical or geometric or complex. I'm a problem solver, so that is my delight. I love taking these kinds of standardized tests or multiple choice tests. So I'm curious to know what you think. I'm always on the lookout for interesting vintage patterns, and I often find looking at Trove, the Australian website that has old newspaper clippings, nets me some interesting things. So recently in my search, I stumbled upon a very small article in the Australian Women's Mirror from September 1932, and I'm just going to read it to you. It's short. Making up in knitting. Much good knitting is spoiled by being badly made up. That's, I guess, Australian English for assembling, putting together. To obtain professional results, each piece of knitting must be pressed with a moderately hot iron and damp cloth on a thick blanket covered with a clean cloth. Stocking stitch should be pressed first on the right side and then on the wrong. Flat fancy patterns in the same way, but raised fancy patterns on the back only. Ribbing should not be pressed at all unless specially directed. The work should be pulled gently into shape, but not stretched at all, except garter stitch, which will drop very much in wear unless stretched at first. Please comment below and tell me if you iron your knitting. I have never done it. I know Arna and Carlos do, and they showed damp tea towel and the steam iron, and they're really pressing their color work. I've never done it. I've just wet blocked things, but I'm curious to know if there are people out there who are ironing. In the news more recently was an article in the New York Times about a woman who made a trip to Iceland as a non-knitter and found that knitting was all around, and she visited all sorts of interesting places pertaining to knitting. So in the show notes, I'll put a link to that New York Times article, and you can go and read it. I think it'd be very interesting for you. Has anybody been to Iceland? I have not. It's on my bucket list. I think it would be a swell place to visit, and it's not too far from New York. I think it's much faster than going to Europe. And then they have the Northern Lights, will be very exciting to see. Okay, so we've talked about no FOs, we've talked about a couple of whips, acquisitions. I have no yarn acquisition because I don't have any impending projects. I will be going to Rhinebeck in just a few weeks from now. I can't believe it. So I'm kind of saving up to purchase yarn there for upcoming projects, which I haven't decided on yet. But last year at Rhinebeck, I saw Kiviot, and I really wanted to buy it, but I just couldn't find the right pattern to go with. It's very, very thin. This time I will try and come a little more prepared, knowing that I probably want to shop for that there. They have beautiful colors, and it makes a really delicate fabric. So the only acquisitions I have to show you are not knitting related, but you know that I'm a jewelry lover, especially vintage. So recently I did pick up a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. In my neighborhood, there's a vintage charity shop. Everything in the place is vintage. I avoid going in there because I want many, many things. They have china, they have crystal, they have kitchen implements, they have furniture, they have men's clothing, women's clothing, they have old sweaters, they have cases and cases of jewelry and eyeglass frames and shoes and gloves and all sorts of things. But this was winking at me. And I asked the guy behind the counter if he would take it out of the case so that I could see it, because I suspected I knew what it was, and he did not. So sure enough, when I flipped it over, I saw the patented Coro duet mechanism. I have shown this before, but perhaps you haven't seen it, so let me demonstrate for you again. This can be worn as a brooch, but it can also be worn as dress clips. So here's the pin for the brooch, but there are these spring pieces on the back. It looks like a clip-on earring, but you would not want to put that on your ear because these prongs here are very pointy and sharp. They're meant to grip onto your fur or coat or sweater or dress. That's the dress clip. So women would wear one on this side, and then you pop off the other one, and you could just put this piece aside if you want to wear them as dress clips, and then you could put the other one on the other side. So if you've never seen that, it's something to be on the lookout for. And this one actually has the patent number on it, and in very, very tiny print. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. It says at the top, Coro Duet. Directly from that shop, I went to my knitting group and I showed it to them. I was very excited. The next week, my friend Sabina, who's always finding little things that she wants to get rid of and send my way, like those vintage knitting needles, she came with this little bag of bonbons for me, a pair of dress clips, and then an odd one that doesn't have a mate, which happens a lot. That's why I was so thrilled to get the whole thing, all three pieces. So this is not only missing its mate, but all of these are missing this contraption. Now, I hadn't tried her clips on this backing. I don't know if they'll work. They might. Yeah, I think that, well, her, the spring isn't working so well, but I think if I got it on here, I might be able to use it as a brooch with both the pieces. This can't really be used as a dress clip because it's not springing back. This is just flopping in the wind. Anyway, I thought it was really, really kind of her to think of me and they're pretty. Also, recently, I stumbled into a vintage jewelry shop that's in my neighborhood. I try not to go into these places very often because, I get kind of tempted. They had drawers and drawers filled with earrings and a separate drawer for each color. So in the white drawer, I spotted these. What's her name? Can't think of it. They're little glass beads wired onto screw back. I have already in my collection a very similar pair of earrings, which I love a lot. They're a great summer earring. It's hard to find white jewelry that's not plastic and cheesy looking, but I already had these in my collection, which I love and do wear from time to time. And I thought, oh, if ever I lose one of these or one breaks, what will I do? I have white milk glass beads, a long rope of beads, and these are just perfect with that. So I thought, it wouldn't hurt to have another pair. I could mix and match if I really had to, or if I lost one of each, I could still put together a pair. So I couldn't resist those, and the price was right. They didn't cost an arm and a leg. As long as I was in the shop, I kept looking, and then I found these. Now, you probably have seen some of the sweaters I've knit. I'm often in the periwinkle lavender family. It seems like it's a good color for me. These are little glass petals on a clip back. And they're wired on much in the same way that those little beads are wired on. So grabbed those too. I never saw earrings like these before, so I thought, oh, the color is just so great. It's hard to find earrings that are in color. A lot of times things are just metal. And especially this color, I really hadn't seen before. So that's it in the acquisitions category. In one of my recent episodes, I talked to the president of the Center for Knit and Crochet, and she was encouraging me to encourage you to post things on their website. So I went ahead and I put up a couple of photographs of my Aunt Matilda's sequin dress. And I thought, since some of you might be a little intimidated on the steps to take to do that, I recorded what I did so that you could follow along with me and see how I did it, and you'd be able to go through the same steps and do it too. So I'll insert that short video here. I have arrived at the homepage for centerforknitandcrochet.org, and I am going to attempt to walk you through how I will put up an entry into their collections. So first I drop down the collections and programs, and I go into the digital repository. I'll click on that, and I'll click on the tab that says contribute. Okay, I need to scroll down. So I'm in the contribute tab, and I scroll down a little bit. What type of item do you want to contribute? An object. I'm going to upload a file. Okay, so now I'm in the folder where I have some of the images of the dress I want to upload. First, I'll do this overall picture. I wonder if I'm able to upload more than one picture. brief description that encapsulates the most important elements of my object. And knit sequin dress. The creator, an entity primarily responsible for making the resource. Okay, so the creator was Luber Matilda. A point or period of time associated with an event in the life cycle of the resource. I don't know the exact date. I'm going to say 1962. Maybe I could say circa. The file format, physical medium, or dimensions of the resource. I'm not sure what they mean. It's a JPEG file. The physical medium, it's wool and sequins. I don't know the dimensions of it, but I'm going to guess that it's maybe, I'll say 38 inches. I don't want to pull it out of my closet. It's all packaged up in tissue paper and safe from insects. So I'll just kind of guess. An account of the resource. Information that provides what it is, who made it, who designed it, when, how, why it was made. This wool. Okay, so this seems to be the main place to tell the story. I wish this field were larger so I could see everything at a glance instead of just 5 words at a time. However, she was practically a professional knitter. Her knitting would have you believe a machine had knit it. I'm assuming that I can come back and edit this, so I'm not going to bore you with while I write the whole story, but I can already see that this is challenging because of the field being so small, and yet down here, the field is quite large. A statement of any changes in ownership and custody of the resource since its creation that are significant. Okay, the statement may include a description of any changes. Billie Elias is the current owner. Matilda was pencil slim, unlike her sister or niece. Changes in ownership since its creation. No changes have been made. I think I'll fill in some more of this private stuff without sharing it with you, but I will at least show you that they require your email. They ask you for basic profile information. I don't know what hide. Oh, no, I want to show it. Institutional affiliation. Well, I'm not a museum. About me. Oh, I'll have to work on that. I wonder if it's possible to come back and edit this later on. Well, just in case, I'll stop recording and I'll fill this in about me. I would select that I'm not a robot. I would publish my contribution. I don't need to keep my identity private. I'll read the terms and conditions, and if they're satisfactory, I will agree to them, and then I'll hit contribute. So I'll do the rest of this without you watching, but I think that gives you a pretty good idea. After I get past this point, I may come back and show you more because more interesting stuff might happen. So it took me a while, but I wrote up little blurbs for each of those different sections, and I hit the contribute button, and it brought me to this screen, which thanks me for contributing. And it sounds like it just needs to be approved by an administrator, and then it will be up. So I hope that now you've seen how simple it is, that you'll consider going to this website and making your own contributions. It's kind of fun, and it made me really reflect on what a beautiful knitter my aunt was and how special the things that she made are and how fortunate I am to be the owner of them. The last thing that I'll share with you today is a fulfillment of my promise, I guess about a month or so ago, when I had visited the Metropolitan Museum's special exhibit in the Costume Institute called Sleeping Beauties. I showed you a little bit of the exhibit, but I did go back a second time to get even more photographs. So I'm going to put a series of slides here. Some of them have a little bit of video. I hope you'll find it interesting. It was a most unusual exhibit because the museum was attempting to reach us through all of our senses. Sense of smell, they captured the fragrances and odors of clothes and hats in their collection. So sense of smell, sense of touch, they had something there that you could actually touch, which is unusual for a museum. Sense of sight, of course, it's all visually stimulating. Sense of sound, well, they did have in different galleries recording. Sometimes it was music or birds flapping their wings or someone reading poetry. Very unusual. I might have some of that to share with you. One thing that was really difficult for me to capture, but I tried on my second visit, were these hats, vintage hats that had birds as part of the decoration. What they did was x-ray the hats so that they could get an x-ray of the skeleton of the bird inside. And it was in a very darkened gallery. A lot of the things are so delicate that they're almost crumbling and very susceptible to damage from light. So they keep these things in very low light. Typically, they're stored in the dark. But when they're on display, they want the lighting to be very, very low. So they seem to have designed a lighting system where the lights would start bright, not really bright, but relatively speaking, and then they would get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, and then it would cycle back. So at no time was the light just constantly on the thing. It kept like fading and coming back and fading and coming back. I'd never seen them do that for anything. And there were two Elsa Schiaparelli collars. Most museums own none. The Met happens to own two of these. And I read the little placard that said usually only one would be on display, and they rotate them because they're done in some kind of a vinyl or plastic material that will crumble with age or crack and discolor. But for this special exhibit, they put both on display side by side. And you know, I'm a big Schiaparelli fan. If you don't already know that, I'll put a link here so you can go and see some of the prior episodes where I talk about Schiaparelli and the Schiaparelli sweater that I knit with a group of other knitters and went to Paris to see the original in a special Schiaparelli retrospective. Okay, so that wraps it up for this week. Stick around if you want to see the slides, and I'll try not to make it so long until I'm with you again. Stay well, everyone. COVID is rearing its ugly head, so please be careful. Ciao.
sunset glow. Love, we were loved. And now we're alone. In flight escape.
You are too close to the ark. Please step away.
The white moon heard it, and she forgot the dawn and lingered on in the sky. The red rose heard it, and it trembled all over with ecstasy and opened its petals to the cold morning air. Echo bore it to her purple cabin in the hills